Hello. In this math video, I will do a GED video regarding evaluating algebraic expressions. So yes, we are doing a GED math video regarding um evaluating algebraic expression. Okay, so just like before the other videos, before we start, there are some things you must know to make it easier to do these three problems. So let me write some important notes. So go ahead and write this. Go ahead and get your notebook and write this down. So one the important note before setting up an equation, label your variables. So we are doing algebraic expressions, and that's most that's basically equations. So before setting up, label your variables. Okay. So you'll see what I mean. So before setting up an equation, label your variables. That's rule one note. The second note is when you set up an equation and figure out if you're looking for the input, something you put inside the function or output, the stuff that comes out the equation. So yes, so after you set up your equation, or when you're setting up your equation, set up, yeah, set up, once you know your variables, set up an equation. And then you got to ask yourself or figure out if you are looking for an input. So an input is basically something you put inside the function, right? So input is something you put inside. Or are you looking for an output? That's very important. So what is an output? It's basically the stuff you put it. Uh, the output is the something that comes out of the equation. So in this problem, in these word problem, input is usually the x value and output is really the y value. So you can also think of it as that. So input is usually the x value. Output is usually the y value. So yeah, let's go over the first two rules. Before you set up an equation, yes, you are going to set up an equation. You got to label your variables. So you can use any letters you like. You can, for example, if you're dealing with shoes and boots, right? X could be shoes, Y could be boots, or S could be shoes, and then B for boots, right? It's really up to you. You can be very creative. Okay. Step two, when you do set up an equation, you got to ask yourself if you're looking for an input, something you put inside the function or usually next value, or are you looking for an output, something that the stuff that comes out of the function or a y value, right? So that's something you need to ask yourself. Okay, whoops. Um, and then also you need to also know the common equation. You also need to know the equation y equals mx plus b. This will be something that'll come up again. This is a linear line, and yes, we will use this equation when we are doing these three problems. So you might have to use this equation. You may or may not. Y of x equals mx plus b. Um, yeah, it's a linear equation. M is the slope, B is the y-intercept, or you could think of B as the starting point. Yeah. So you might use this. You will use this one in this problem. And then you're either going to find the input or the output. Okay. And then rule four is kind of like rule two. Find the input or output. So this is after you find the equation, right? Find if that was this is after you label your variables, find your equation. You just got to ask yourself, am I looking for an input or an output? And that's pretty much how you evaluate word problems involving algebraic expression. Okay. Okay, go ahead and copy those four wording keynotes. And we can start with the first question. So if you need to pause the video to write down the important keynotes, go ahead. I am going to clear and start with question one. Okay, so question one says, it's a bit, move up a bit. Question one says, Maya goes shopping and spends $20 on shoes and buys X number of t-shirts at $15 each. If Maya buys three shirts, what is the total amount she spends? So this one is not really asking for an input and output. Well, I guess it's technically figuring out the output. But first step is we're gonna have to label our variable, right? So what are we dealing with? We are dealing with shoes and t-shirts, right? So you can set it, you can use any letters you like. I will use X for shoes and Y for t-shirts. So that's the first step. Label your variables. Since we're dealing with shoes and t-shirts, I'm gonna say X is shoes and Y is t-shirts, okay? Okay, so Maya goes shopping and spends $20. Yeah, spends $20 on shoes and buys X numbers. So um $20 on shoes. So it's gonna be, yeah, it's going to be X and t-shirts. What do we say? Y was shirts and spends $20 on shoes and buys X number of t-shirts. We said t-shirts was Y, so maybe we could at $15, so you could be 15Y. Okay. And then what just substitute what they give us. So they said that she spent $20 on shoes, so you're gonna replace X with 20. And then it's 15. This is really 15 times Y because it's $15 each for t-shirts. I know it said X for t-shirts. Yeah, you could also, if you wanted to replace t-shirt for X, that's perfectly fine. But it's really the same thing, 15 times Y, just $15 each. So it's really 15 times 3, right? So you have $20 in shoes, so it's 20. And then 15 times 3 is 45. And that comes out as $65. Okay. So that is your total amount. So this is kind of like figuring out the output, but um, you got to figure out your variables. So we said X is shoes and Y is t-shirts. I mean, you don't have to use Y for t-shirts. You could have also used X for t-shirts and then Y for shoes. It's really up to you. And then just substitute. So she said she spends $20 on shoes, and then she bought a total of 3 t-shirts, so it's 15 times 3. So 20 plus 45 is 65. Okay, so that's letter C. Okay, let's move on to question 2. Okay, question 2 says a ride-sharing service charges $2 as a base fee. A ride share let me read it again. A ride sharing service charges $2 as a base fare plus 75 cents per mile for a ride. If the ride is 10 miles long, what is the total cost for the ride? So on this one, this problem is this is a linear equation problem. And the reason why I know it's a linear equation is because it has some kind of um, slope or a rate. So if you have some kind of rate, like for example, something per something, in our case it was per mile, that's pretty much how you know you're dealing with a linear equation. So we use the equation y equals mx plus b. And then m is the slope, or I like to call it the uncontrolled value or the undetermined value. So our m would be the amount of miles, or yeah, no, our m is going to be 75, 0.75, because it's kind of like the uncontrolled value. It's 75 cents per mile. Well, we don't really know that cost because we don't know how much mile um you're going to drive, right? So M is like the uncontrolled value. That's how you know. Oh, and then I should have labeled our variable. So what is our X? Our X is going to be the amount of miles. And then Y is the cost in dollars. So this is super helpful in any word problem. So in any word problems, you need to know your variables. So Y is dollars. Okay, so let me recap what I did. So I know we're going to use the equation of y equals mx plus b, and I know it's a linear because if you're dealing with rates, right? That's how you know there's a good chance you're going to use it. It's a linear equation. So I know it's a rate because it says it's 75 cents per mile. That is a rate, right? Okay. Then what I'm going to do, once I know I'm going to use that equation, I'm going to figure out my variables. So x is the amount of miles and y is the cost in dollars. Okay, so that's something you should know. And then what else do we need to know? My M and my B. So I know that my slope is 0.75 because it's the uncontrolled value, right? It's something you really can't determine. And B is like something you can determine. It's your fixed costs, your upfront costs. Um, it's something they just spit out. So what is our upfront cost or our fixed cost? It said that it charges $2 as a base fee. So it doesn't matter if you don't write it, you still got to pay $2. So that's how I know my B values too. Okay. So once I know that, I know my slope, I know my B, I know that X represents the amount of miles and Y is cost in dollars. Go ahead and set up an equation. So it's going to be Y, or really Y of X. My M we said was 0.75, and then it's going to be X plus B, and my B is 2. Okay. And then what we're going to do is figure out, are they asking for an input or an output? So input in our case, it's the X value. So are they asking for the amount of miles or are they asking for the Y value or the cost in dollars? So it says, what is the total cost of the ride? So that's your clue. They're asking for a Y value, right? The output. So that's what we need. Um, if the ride is 10 miles long, so they actually tell us another piece of information. 10 miles is the amount of miles, so they tell us an X value. So we're gonna plug in our 10. So we want to figure out what's the output. So wherever you see an X, plug in 10. So it's going to be 0.75 times 10 plus 2. And when you put in the calculator, it's 0.75 times 10 is 7.5 plus 2. And then 7.5 plus 2 is 950. Okay, that's what we want. We want to find the output or the Y value or the cost, right? So yeah, that's how you do these problems. So figure out what equation you're going to use. We're going to use y equals mx plus b. Figure out your variables. X is the amount of miles, so y is the cost of dollars. Fill in additional information. Our slope is 0.75. My b is 2, and my it tells an x value 10. Then you got to figure out, are they asking for an input and an output? They specifically said, what is the total cost? You said that y is cost in dollars, so that means we are figuring out the output, right? So what we do is plug in an input, an x value, which they tell us was 10, and figure out the y value, which is 950. That's it. Okay, and let's move on to the next one. Question 3. A mobile plan costs $30 as a base fee and an additional $10 per gigabyte GB of data used. If a user consumes 5 gigabytes of data, what is the total cost of their mobile phone plan for the month? So let's figure out what equation we're going to use. Yes. 3 is just like 2. We are definitely going to use the linear line y equals mx plus b. Right? We're definitely going to use that. It's all you could also say y of x equals x plus b. That's the same thing. Right? Okay. Now what we're going to do is why are we using this? Because we have some kind of slope or an uncontrolled value. It said it costs additional $10 per gigabytes of data. So that's like an uncontrolled value or an uncontrolled cost. So that's how I know I'm going to use um, y equals mx plus b. So now what I'm going to do is label our variables. So what is our x and what is our y? So I believe our x is going to be the amount of gigabytes. And our y is going to be the amount of money in dollars, right? Okay. So we know our variables. X is the amount of gigabytes of data. Y is the amount of money in dollars. What else do they tell us? A mobile phone plan costs $30 as a base fee. So you tell me, what do you think that 30 represent? Is that a B or an M? It is definitely a upfront cost or starting fee. So that's how you know maybe it is 30. It's $30. Okay. And what else do they tell us? It tells us an additional $10 per gigabyte of data use. That means our M, our slope or our uncontrolled value is $10. Okay, and what else do they tell us? If a user consumes 5 gigabytes of data, so what does the 5 gigabytes of data represent? We said that represents X represents amount of gigabytes, so X is going to be 5. Okay. Now you tell me, what do you think are they asking? Are they asking for an input? And we said our input is the X value, the amount of gigabytes, or are they asking for output or the amount of dollars? So the last sentence says, what is the total cost of their mobile plan per month? So that's a big clue. We got to try to figure out a Y value or an output, right? Good. So you have all this information. So we're going to use y equals mx plus b. X represents the amount of gigabytes. Y represents the amount of money in dollars. And then they also tell us that our slope is 30. So it's $30 as a no, our M is 10 because it's $10 per gigabyte. And my B is 30. And they tell us an additional X value. And then we got to figure out our Y value. So let's put that all together. So it's Y equals, or Y of X equals M, which was 10X, and then plus my B, which is 30. Okay, and then they tell us an input value or an X value, which is 5. So it's going to be Y of 5 equals 10 times 5 is 30. And then 10 times 5 is 50 plus 30, which is 80. Okay, that's our front answer. 80 represents an output or a Y value, $80. Okay, that's it. So that's how you do these problems. We're definitely going to do more when we do an actual practice test. These are more like practice exercise. So yeah, these are definitely practice exercise to prepare you for a practice exam. Okay, so that's why these videos are kind of short. But yeah, we're gonna do a practice games where we're gonna to test all the test exercise. Okay, I'm gonna stop here.